A good personal mission statement has three components. First, core purpose. Second, core principles. And third, core beliefs. Now, notice right here, I didn't necessarily include what you are specifically doing with your life, and that's intentional for two reasons. And first, that's because before you can answer the question, what am I going to do with my life? You need to answer the question, who am I? What do I stand for? And why am I here at all? Who you are and why you exist needs to precede your specific, concrete aims in life. And that's really what the mission statement focuses on. Second, the purpose of your mission statement is to define the rock bottom principles that define you, even in times where you don't know what you are doing or where you are going. You want your mission statement to be something that can orient you and give you purpose, even when your entire world is moving around you and seems to be giving away, when you've lost your job, lost your house, and the wonderful plan you have for your life seems entirely blown apart. Your mission statement is a good one if it is able to help you then in those circumstances. Only then will it be able to guide you in the more ordinary, everyday circumstances of life. What you are going to do specifically with your life goal or life vision, is thus a slightly distinct thing from your mission and at a slightly lower level. It's important but distinct. Think of the difference like this. Using the great social reformer William Wilberforce as an example. His mission was glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Wilberforce's life goal, that focused on what he did with his life, which was bring an end to the slave trade. And that's such a big goal. It was a life goal. It was overarching. It was more than just a 1-year goal, 5-year goal. It was an overarching goal that guided everything he did. But that was not his mission per se. His mission was something higher even, the ultimate purpose for why he is here. The key difference is this. You can fail at your life goal and still succeed at your mission, and thus your life, because your mission is a matter of principle. And thus it is something you can do in failure as well as success. Now, of course, fortunately for us, Wilberforce accomplished both his mission and life goal, though not without great perseverance and much hardship along the way. We will talk about creating a good life goal or life vision in the next session. Right here, we're talking about your mission. And the first thing we need to know is actually why most mission statements fail. And why do some mission statements fail to inspire or connect or really connect with us? And it's because of this, and maybe it's slightly controversial, but it's actually possible to have the wrong mission in life. It is possible to have the wrong mission. As I mentioned, most time management books treat your mission as something highly individual and personal. And of course, it is in many ways. But they take that to an extreme and talk in deliberately ambiguous terms such as what matters most, in order to leave room for each person to define what matters most for himself or herself at the ultimate level, as if it's merely a matter of subjective decision. But that's not true. It's not true for the simple reason that we did not create ourselves. Since we didn't create ourselves, we can't define our own purpose either. God created you and defined your purpose. Your role is to know what that purpose is, embrace it, and state it in a way that captures your own individuality and uniqueness. Yes, there is something unique to each of us about our mission, why we're here, how we are to go about it. But then there is also more fundamental than that, something universal for all of us. So often we look to ourselves to figure out our purpose. You will not find your purpose merely by introspection. Rather, you find it from revelation, by looking to God and what He has said. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight." How do we create our mission? If we look to God ultimately to show us our purpose, How do we discover that and articulate that in a way that works? Well, we've seen there's 3 parts to a mission statement, and the first is core purpose. This states your overall reason for existence. Hence, this is where you state the biblical purpose of your life in your own words and in a way that reflects your uniqueness and that applies it to you personally. As we saw earlier, this gets at the purpose for everything you do more than the specific course you are to take in life. Here's how Jesus states our purpose. Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before others that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. There's the ultimate purpose of life, to display God's attributes in the world, to reflect God's character in the world, and thus glorify him. We are to be living examples of God and his character. That's what it means to be made in his image. And as we live in a way that reflects his attributes, it will lead others to glorify God. And the greatness of God's character is displayed not just in our intentions and even merely our inward character, as crucial as that is, but in our character expressed in actions, good works, which Jesus highlights in this passage. John Piper articulates this so well when he says this: God created me and you to live with a single, all-embracing, all-transforming passion, namely a passion to glorify God by enjoying and displaying his supreme excellencies in all the spheres of life. That's our purpose. That's our mission in life. Let me give you one example here. This is actually from my publisher, Zondervan, and this is on their wall, which I think is important. It's good. It makes it a reminder to people every day. It's also dangerous because sometimes companies put a mission on their wall and don't really live it, and it's just a relic, and it breeds cynicism. But my publisher lives it, and that's what makes it significant, and it's important that it's on the wall as a reminder to people, and it's just a great mission. Let me state it here. Let me read it. We inspire the world by meeting the needs of people with content that promotes biblical principles and honors Jesus Christ. I love it. They get to the heart of things right there. They inspire the world. That's a great statement of purpose. It's implied for the glory of God because they state at the end, honoring Jesus Christ. And then, yes, in their mission, they get at how they do that, which I think is fine. Sometimes it's okay to, I think, to integrate how you carry out your purpose with the statement of purpose. Though they are distinct, I don't want to say you have to necessarily create two different statements. It's okay to integrate them, which they do, and it brings great clarity to people. So they inspire the world by meeting the needs of people with content that promotes biblical principles and honors Jesus Christ. So that's a wonderful example of a purpose statement. Okay, the next component of your mission is core principles. And this is where we get more into the practical realm. We aren't yet at the level of what specific course you are seeking to take in life, but rather the guiding philosophies and principles by which you will live your life, your core tenets. The core principles section of your mission statement contains answers to questions like, what are the main principles by which I'm going to live and guide my life? Sometimes it is suggested that you list your values, and I think that's helpful. And this is really basically a form of doing that. If you list your values, it's useful to keep it limited to about 5 to 7 because it's hard to really focus on more. So if you don't include something, it doesn't mean you don't value it at all. You're getting at what is especially core and central. But I have a hard time limiting it to 5 to 7. So I take the approach of listing them as guiding principles, listing a whole bunch of guiding principles, actually. And I think that's legitimate too. And that's how a lot of Christians would do this through the ages. It's interesting. It can seem like I'm talking about something new, listing your values, something even from the business world or secular time management thinkers, as if this is something we just came up with over the last 50 years or so. But actually, this has been a very common practice through the centuries. If you look at people, as we'll see later, like Jonathan Edwards, the Puritans, and other great Christians throughout history, it was actually central to how they lived that they would articulate a type of philosophy of life, a set of principles or resolutions. We're talking here chiefly about personal mission statements. In organizational mission statements, I do recommend explicitly listing the core values and keeping it to 3 to 7, between 3 and 7. Then there can be other documents which articulate things like guiding principles in more detail. Jonathan Edwards is a fantastic model here. When he was 19, he wrote his famous resolutions, which are essentially a list of principles taken from the scriptures and applied in a way that was specific to his own life and context. He ultimately had 70 resolutions. This is not a bad model at all. In many ways, it is better than trying to distill 7 core values, as I've talked about. We are going to look at some of Edwards' specific resolutions in a bit. The question right now is, how do you identify what your core principles are? A great test for identifying if something is truly a core principle in your life is if it is something you would hold to even if you were punished for it, even if there was no advantage or practical benefit to upholding that principle, you still would. That's how you identify what you are really about, what your true convictions are, what the beliefs are that have grabbed you. Now, the third part of a mission statement is your core beliefs. And a lot of times this is left out in the secular time management books, but it's really essential if we're gospel-centered, because our mission has to be about more than just what we do. In order to be gospel-centered, we need to base our lives on Christ outside of ourselves. It's not just about us, and it's not based on our own efforts. It's based on Christ. And the beliefs section reflects this. This gives us the ultimate foundation of our mission, which is not character or even correct principles. It's what God has done for you in Christ. And further, knowing that heaven is secured for us who believe, and that we are ultimately going to end up there, really in a new heavens and new earth forever with Jesus, motivates us because it casts a vision for where we are going, and does so on the basis of what Jesus did, not first on what we do. Knowing where we are headed gives us the confidence and direction to live as we ought to live, and gives us hope. It also helps us see that our purpose here is not to abandon the practical affairs of life and only seek to save souls, and neither is it to ignore spiritual realities and live as though only this life matters. Rather, we are to live in this world from the perspective of the next. The joy that this hope produces in turn frees us up to spend our lives radically for the good of others to the glory of God. Make sure to include justice and mercy as part of your principles and purpose. For some reason, it's always tempting when we talk about glorifying God to think we need to detach from the world in order to serve Him. Resist this temptation. God is clear, as we've seen, that serving Him implies a massive commitment to the good of others. And to do that, we must be engaged in the culture, not separated from it. And that is most manifest in a commitment to justice and mercy in your life. Indeed, this is not just a good idea, it is required by God. For example, in stating the ultimate purpose of life, the Bible has lots of different statements on this. Micah 6:8 is one of them, and it says, He has told you, O man, what is good. So that's a cue that we're learning here about the ultimate purpose of life, what is good. And he says this, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. The life of faith can be summarized as doing justice, loving mercy, and doing this in fellowship with God. Those are the 3 chief things God requires of us. Jesus alluded to this passage in Matthew 23:23, referring to these 3 things as the weightier matters of the law. They are at the top. They are among the most important things. They are the chief way that we reflect God's character in the world, because God is just and merciful. And we, as his creatures, are to exhibit these attributes in fellowship with him and in humility, which is the third part, walking humbly with your God. This makes Christianity's ethical system very different from any secular system in the Greek approach, which have ethics really without God. And that does reflect a certain level of virtue and goodness, but it misses the real heart of things in the fullness of what God requires. It's about fellowship with God ultimately and knowing him. But as so often has happened over the last 100 years, we tend to separate knowing God from justice and mercy, as if we can focus on personal piety and not worry about commitment to the common good and public welfare. And that is simply not the biblical vision. In fact, there are passages everywhere that show that if we know God, we will be engaged in justice. In Jeremiah 22, for example, God says, "Is not this what it means to know me?" And he's talking about doing justice. So we cannot separate public justice from personal piety. And also doing justice, it's not this reduced concept of merely being fair and honest in all your dealings, as important as that is. But so often we reduce justice just to that. And people miss the flair, the excitement, and the passion that God really intends. What he means by justice is not merely the avoidance ethic, avoiding certain things like dishonesty or being involved in things that are impure and not appropriate. That's included, but it goes beyond that. To be just means to use any influence and ability you have on behalf of those in need. That's the ultimate meaning of justice in the scripture. That's the right use of power, as Gary Haugen points out in his excellent book, Good News About Injustice. And that's also what we see in Isaiah's statement on the nature of life as God intended for his people in the world. He says in chapter 1, "Cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause." So to be just is ultimately to use your power on behalf of those in need. People who are on the lookout to find people in need and use their power and ability for the good of others in radical, creative ways, those are the people truly reflecting the character of God. That's a beautiful thing. It's a glorious thing, glorifying to God. That stands out. That is remarkable. That's what will get the world paying attention to the church and what we have to say about all of our need for forgiveness and salvation in Christ. And likewise, to pursue mercy is to be diligent and proactive in seeking good for others. It means putting others before ourselves and sacrificing our own interests for their sake, especially when they are in difficulty and pain. And it means being holistic and caring for the physical, social, and psychological needs of others, not just their spiritual needs, as the parable of the Good Samaritan shows. We could say that justice and mercy pursued in fellowship with Christ are the chief means by which we glorify God and show his greatness in the world. And we see this in Jeremiah 22:16, where God is speaking of David and he says, "He judged the cause of the poor and needy. Then it was well. Is not this to know me?" So notice two cool things here. First, then it was well. He's talking about productivity, talking about affluence even, and so forth. And it's based in the character ethic. When David pursued justice and mercy, it was well. This is not to say things always go well for us when we do the right thing. A lot of times suffering happens, as the book of Job shows, which is not our fault, or sometimes it is. We got to persevere through trial and difficulty. But what we see here is the root of things going well is ultimately in character, not mere secondary greatness, as we've seen. And then second, notice God ties this to knowing him. It is not an option to separate justice from personal piety. Instead, God says, "Is not this," that is pursuing justice, "what it means to know me?" So given this as our mission, We should seek to walk with God continually through prayer and trust in His Word, be a part of a community of believers and a good church where we worship corporately, love people right where we are in all of our vocations, and seek to meet physical needs here and abroad and pursue justice for the oppressed wherever we see it and around the world. To close, let's look at an example of a mission statement from what I would say is the best mission statement in the history of the world. And that is Jonathan Edwards' 70 resolutions. Here are just a few of his resolutions. It's amazing how biblically grounded and God-centered they are. Okay, here's Edwards' first resolution, which is essentially the overall purpose statement of his life, the core purpose part of the mission statement we talked about. He says, resolved that I will do whatsoever I think to be most to God's glory and my own good, profit, and pleasure to the whole of my duration, without any consideration of the time, whether now or never so many myriads of ages hence. Here's another resolution. Resolved to do whatever I think to be my duty and most for the good and advantage of mankind in general. Resolved to do this whatever difficulties I meet with, how many and how great soever. Here's another resolution. Resolved to live with all my might while I do live. Another, resolved to endeavor to obtain for myself as much happiness in the other world as I possibly can, with all the power, might, vigor, and vehemence, yes, violence I am capable of or can bring myself to exert in any way that can be thought of. See even his creativity and ambition here in doing good. It's amazing stuff. Here's one more. Resolved, when I think of any theorem in divinity to be solved, immediately to do what I can towards solving it if circumstances don't hinder. That's because he was a theologian. Actually, here's one more. Resolved to be endeavoring to find out fit objects of charity and liberality. There's justice and mercy, which we've talked about. And notice his proactive ethic. He's seeking out to find those who need, not waiting just for the needs to come to him. Okay, so this is a snapshot of creating your own mission statement. How do you identify specifically what to do with your life? What we've called life goal. That's the next session.